Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much indeed for coming to Noise, Working with Voices, a title chosen by Mikhail. I'm not going to say very much about it because I think it might become apparent why it has that title during the evening. But I'm just going to give a little the format of the evening. We're going to have Mikhail in a performative way talking about his work, and then moving into a discussion between Sonia and Mikhail, but chaired by Cherry Smyth. And then towards the end, there's some time for you to perhaps ask questions or enter into the discussion. And we thought that after the performative element, we'd have a very short break if anybody wants to make a comfort stop or whatever. But I'd like to introduce really Cherry Smyth, who's going to sort of manage the evening. We're delighted that she's playing this role, knowing Mikhail and Mikhail's work well. She's a poet, as I'm sure most of you know, art critic and curator, and moves easily between those. Some of you may know Test Orange, her collection that was published last year, and I believe she's about to publish a book later on this year. Feminist subjectivity through the artist model. So Cherry, you cover an extraordinary range of skills and media, and that's what you will be managing tonight. So thank you very much indeed for chairing, if that's the right word, this event. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you. Yes, please do.
Thanks, Tessa, for inviting me. And I've known Mikhail and Sonia for many, many years and watched their practice develop and been totally inspired by both of them as people, as artists, as people who don't give up. And as you all know, to make anything, it's perseverance, often as much as talent. Later on, I'm going to just be chairing a discussion and then opening up to questions. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Sonia Boyce, who I think probably all of you know, and probably some of you remember her early paintings that, you know, just changed the representation of black women and black female artists in this country. It was really phenomenal when she started to appear with her work. And she's been a practicing artist for over 30 years, is shown nationally and internationally, and doesn't want me to mention any of her gongs. She's also worked with a wide range of communities and in very different formats, from photography, collage, painting, drawing, installation and sound, and she's also a really formidable archivist, as you can see in the education space here. This timely and very exciting solo show here celebrates two key works: the collaboration with Mikhail Karikis, For You, Only You, made in 2007, and Oh Adelaide, made in collaboration with Eileen Bailey, who's also here tonight, and I'm sure will chip in later. And as I mentioned, the devotional collection is a formidable collection of archive material, cassettes, vinyl, posters relating to black women in the music industry. Sonia's work's collected by the Tate, and at the moment she's working on a new commission for the Liverpool and Gothenburg Biennial, which has just brought her back from Sweden, filming in Sweden. So we probably will hear about that later. It combines, no we won't, activism, protest, all the things that, you know, drive us to keep going. I'm also delighted to introduce Mikhail. He's based in London, and his work ranges through sound, performance, video, and also wonderful. He's a wonderful musician and performer. He's recently shown at Manifesta #9, and he represented Denmark for some strange reason at Venice Biennial 2 years ago. He also had a solo show at Arnolfini in Bristol, and this summer we're both going to Japan to the Aichi Triennial, where he's performing and showing work. He's just come back last night from working in Italy, making a new commission for Art Sheffield and the Sydney Biennial. This collaboration with Sonia marked the beginning of a series of large-scale projects which saw him collaborate with different communities on different continents. And I'm very interested in talking about the sort of legacy, this was made in 2007, the legacy for both artists of that collaboration, because I think it was key to their practice, this idea of peer collaboration I want to really look at later. So tonight we're going to have a fascinating glimpse into Mikhail's work and then the chance to share their collaborative energy and spirit. So please welcome Mikhail. Thanks.
The first time I clear my throat, I just clear my throat. The second time I clear my throat, I'm getting ready to speak. The third time I'm clearing my throat, I'm asking you to be quiet. But when does that transition from me to addressing you happen? And how do we understand it? The fourth time I clear my throat, I'm nervous. Perhaps I've got stage fright. By the fifth time I've cleared my throat, you're suspicious. Maybe you're nervous. Maybe you giggle, or you smirk. The sixth time I clear my throat causes a kind of embarrassment. Am I losing face? But what is the cause of this embarrassment? Is it because I'm here in front of you, exposed, and you there, sitting, silent, expecting? What are you expecting? Are you waiting for some sort of articulate speech that's not delivered? Is this a kind of appointment that's turning out to be a disappointment? I needed my timer, you know. Well, it's all nonsense. But what is nonsense? And what is the power of nonsense to liberate us from language? At first, both the voice and breath, being invisible, seem to resist representation and give rise to a kind of dynamics of dematerialization and ethereality. Certainly, there are thinkers and artists who explore these dynamics and focus on a purely formal or metaphysical reading of the voice. Such readings of the voice often neglect the ontological connection of voices with bodies and positions them beyond the material world, i.e., it renders them signs of transcendence. The recent popularity of the term the disembodied voice in academic literature demonstrates this. But unless we talk about technologically mediated voices, psychoacoustic phenomena or legend, voices do not exist without physical bodies. Thinking of voices as ethereal or non-material, thinking of voices as ethereal or non-material without the physicality and sensuality of the body is disconcerting to me, because it seems to reproduce a model of thinking about the body and its products familiar in economism. Economism is the way of thinking about the world and how different systems work only from the point of view of profit and economic sort of sense, which places extreme emphasis on the body as a producer, as a consumer or a commodity in order to ultimately annihilate it for the sake of some sort of transcendent value. A very good example of that is when we talk about people like David Beckham and how much he's worth. We don't really think about his body. We think about this transcendent economic value, how much he's worth in financial terms. As I aim to explain in this presentation, engaging with the voice expands further. When we truly employ the voice as a conceptual compass, it inevitably leads to a deep engagement with people, their bodies, their cultures, politics, and the human psyche. Aristotle defines man as zoon, logon, echon, which means man as a speaking animal, which is often translated as a rational animal. To be a speaking animal, man, woman, first has a voice. Voice and speaking, the phonic and the semantic, must be distinguished. We must pay attention to the sonorous, the acoustic, the resonant quality of phony, the voice. Logocentrism, the emphasis on language, emphasizes the semantic, the abstract, the symbolic, the disembodied what, and the metaphysical symbol over the vocalic, the particular embodied who. A very good example of that is, in recent years, art that is being generated that translates voices to some sort of visual sine wave or some sort of disembodied, usually technologically mediated abstraction, in which the voice is completely abstracted and disembodied. The vocal is an anti-metaphysical force that anchors us in the singularity of our bodies. The voice is the expression of one unique embodied individual to another. This expression, fulfilled in the resonant materiality of the voice, constitutes a song. Each time a voice is heard, it invokes, calls for, and expects another's voice. It is a relation. It also needs not to inhabit the realm of language. It may be wordless. An infant makes a sound and the mother responds with a lullaby, or a shush, or a comforting sound, or purely with nonsense. This wordless exchange configures a reciprocal dependence and is the composition of the movement between demand and response. This sets the paradigm and the primary sonic composition of all relationality, of all communication. The maternal vocality underwrites the logos, language, of the father. It is not pure sound. The maternal vocality demonstrates its own resonance and rhythm. It is a force in her own right and meaning in her own terms, not necessarily destined to language. I'm going to go out of my PowerPoint to show you a clip. So this work is called Sounds from Beneath, for which I worked with, or rather I invited a group of a community of former coal miners in Kent. The miners came from different parts of the UK, but or their families did anyway. They were migrant workers, and they ended up in Kent, where they worked in some of the Kentish mines. And I asked them to recall the sounds they used to hear when they worked in the mines. And then over a period of about 7, 8 months, I was going there every week, and I was recording the conversations and sounds they produced when they were recalling these different procedures, mining procedures. And then I made a sound piece which employs these sounds. And then I invited another artist called Uriel Orlo to film the project, film the choir with me on top of one of the mines where they used to work in Kent. The coal mine there is Tilmaston Colliery. And the question there was, what is the power of, so to speak, nonsense, abstract sounds? What is the power of these sounds to actually communicate something that is very historically specific and politically specific? Perhaps I'm not going to say more. We can have a conversation about this later. A quest central to my work has been to research the reasons for the production of vocal sounds which are beyond language and its rules, and the meanings we attach to the nonsense sounds we invent. Squeaks, shouts, whistles, sighs, rhymes, gibberish, jargon, acronyms, cries, yells, and so on are heard in different work environments but make no sense to those outside the specific context where they occur. I would like to think of these sounds as somewhat anarchic, as deserters or rebels occupying an outsider's position in relation to the rules of language and its syntax, which sets out the systems that organize sounds into words, sentences, and phrases. John Cage thought of syntax as the army of language. In works such as Empty Words, John Cage goes as far as to suggest that breaking the rules that govern language leads to a kind of demilitarization of language. I'm not going to analyze this concept in depth here, but it informs my thinking. It informs my thinking of extralingual vocal sounds. It guides my interest in the type of communities I have been working with and influences the artistic strategies that I employ to reappraise conventions that predetermine the other and his or her expressive conduct. In recent works, I've branched out beyond my own voice toward the voices of others, other artists or members of different communities whose professional identities, cultures, and sense of togetherness are tied with the production of unique sounds and vocal practices. So I'm going to go back to my... there is a reason why I didn't incorporate the video in PowerPoint, because it usually gets stuck. So that was Sounds from Beneath. I'm going to ask you to listen to something. So this doesn't work if some of you have seen my show from last year. So those who didn't see the installation I did at Wapping Project or the show at Arnolfini, what do you hear apart from the sea? So what can you hear? What are sorry? Whistling. Yes. Rowing, whistling, maybe talking. What else? So who is whistling then? If it is whistling, who is whistling? You think? Women are whistling. Okay. At sea, while swimming. Yes. Okay. And why do you think that? Why would they do that? Just a hunch. Okay. All right then. We were driving. I was on the island of Jeju, which is between. It belongs to South Korea, but it's in the North Pacific between Japan and China, and the south of South Korea. And we were driving around this island where I was doing some sort of residency when I heard this sound, and I was quite intrigued because I didn't know what exactly it was. Of course, I could hear whistling, but I couldn't identify whether it was animal whistling, whether it was birds or a mammal, or I didn't quite know. It was coming from the sea. So I asked my friend to stop the car because I wanted to listen properly. And then I saw silhouettes in the water. And I thought they were seals. I told her, oh my God, I haven't seen seals like this before, and definitely I haven't heard them whistling. She said, these are not seals. They're women. But then when they turned and they came closer, I realized that they were not just any women. They were all women, and they were in their 80s. So what would make a group, and they swam in a kind of small group, what would make a small group of 80-year-old women who are all dressed the same way produce the same kind of sounds? What is the purpose of these sounds? I was quite intrigued, so I decided to stay. Well, I ended up staying 3 months, but actually I came back and I got myself organized and I went back to find out what this sound was. So I was talking about different communities for whom sound is a kind of central part to their being a community. One such community is that of the Henya, female sea workers on the North Pacific island of Jeju, a small patch of black volcanic land which belongs to South Korea and, as I said, flows between China and Japan. Operating outside the currents of modernization, the Henya, literally meaning sea women, a word that doesn't exist in English as one word, are an ancient and fast-vanishing community that now consists predominantly of 60 to 90-year-old women who dive to depths of up to 20 meters with no oxygen supply to catch seafood, collect seaweed, and find pearls. This is a gendered profession, practiced only by females. There are several reasons for this. A physiological explanation is that the distribution of fat in women's bodies insulates them against the cold. So in the coldest winter months, we would allow the women to dive for 8 consecutive hours and fish for pearls, seafood, and seaweed. The male body wouldn't actually be able to withstand such cold temperatures. We're talking about, I mean, when I first went, it was -2 and it was snowing. In the past, the women wouldn't wear these wetsuits. Yeah, in the past, they just wore cotton clothes. So this is a kind of physiological hypothesis. A cultural reason for them being only women doing this is the attitude toward exposing the flesh and nudity, which was considered to be degrading and was reserved for poor women of low social status. So the henna profession was a social stigma, and to a great extent it still is a stigma. A socio-political factor which contributed to the growth of this women-only profession, paradoxically, is the sexism of Confucian law, which until the beginning of last century did not recognize female labor as work, excluding the henna from taxation. Thus, the diving women engaged in a low-status profession and worked against the will of the state, but brought the entire income back home. What did they do with it? They educated their daughters so that they wouldn't have to do it. So the actual profession is vanishing at the moment. There's a very small community of them left, and we envisage, I mean, people who kind of engage in this kind of research, they envisage that there will not be any henna left in the next 15 years. A henna may dive up to 80 times a day. Each dive lasts up to 2 minutes and is punctuated by a combination of sounds, including a high-pitched, breathy shriek or a whistle, an arguably spontaneous vocal firework bursting out of the mouth, which one might mistake for a dolphin or a bird call. At once alarming and joyous, this sound is as thin as a blade, marking the horizon between life and death. The diving women make a living by constantly negotiating the limits of that which sustains them, their breath. But they come prepared. They are equipped with a sumbisori, an ancient breathing technique which has been practiced for centuries. It is taught by one generation to the next when new girls start diving at the age of 8. The little research that exists on the physiology of the sumbisori reveals that the technique entails exhaling very rapidly all the carbon dioxide accumulated in the body and quickly inhaling fresh oxygen, causing a violent inhalation and a high-pitched, wheezy, wisping sort of gasp. These sounds occupy high frequencies above the noise of the sea and are easily identifiable. Basically, I was trying to find out why is it this specific sound and not something else. In fact, I started thinking about this when I immersed myself in this community. I was there for about, as I said, 3 months. I was around them for maybe 2 months. And I encountered one deaf henna. So she could not have heard or learned this sound because she couldn't hear. And she could not, in fact, reproduce that sound. She didn't make the sound. She made other noises, but not that high-pitched whistling sound. So I was thinking, what else does that sound mean, and why do the women do it? So this sound, because it occupies a very different combination of sound frequencies from that of the sea, it actually distinguishes them. It's a kind of acoustic signal when they are diving, so that they are aware of the fact that they're all in close proximity. Also, each sumbisori, each whistling sound, because it's produced in a different body, it has a very different resonance. to a trained ear is really different. So it also operates as a kind of acoustic signature for each woman. The Sumbisori, with its aural production, is also a work skill, a specific craft which a young Henya begins to learn as a young girl and takes years to perfect. Practiced only by women and passed on from mother to daughter, this is a gender-specific skill that is transgenerationally transmitted, creating an intergenerational aural bond that ties the community and functions as a sonic signifier of professional identity. The subtlety of the word Sumbisori reveals an additional layer of meaning. As I'm told by the Henya researcher Dr. Cha Hegyang, the word Sumbisori, literally translated as breath sound, is also parallel to the word of overcoming, to overcome. She explains that the Henya were the ones who led the anti-Japanese resistance movement last century and witnessed the large loss of the male population of the island after the fall of the Japanese rule, when American and South Korean forces massacred those suspected of supporting their reunification with North Korea. In this light, the sound of the Sumbisori becomes charged with the expression of trauma and the working through of suffering. Their sonorities are a complex cultural sound object, the product of a subculture operating within a particular political, geographical, and historical specificity, impregnated with the potential to operate as a marker of a historical event and a non-verbal transmitter of memory, of resistance, and of rising above the circumstances. So I said that this profession is vanishing now. One of the reasons I mentioned is that because of the stigma and the hazardous conditions, the older generation are not passing on their skills onto the younger generation. However, there are no motives. There's no motivation for younger women to engage in this because of the fact that the profession is no longer profitable, and there are different reasons for this. One is the warming of the seas, which has reduced the amount of pearls they catch. Another one is this vast, kind of large-scale industrial fishing, which has, I suppose, two effects. One is that fish is a lot cheaper now because of this kind of large-scale fishing, but also there are currents that very often take the nets to the areas where the women fish. So a very common cause of death is that of women getting caught or kind of entangled in the nets, and they drown. So it is hard to envisage the aural practices of the Henya community, which form a unique sonic subculture interconnected with skill, without the professional practice. The vanishing sounds of their community, their songs, their debates, the communal bathing, their Sumbisori, etc., make little sense divorced from the women's sustainable work. Their reversal of traditional gender roles, their deep sense of community and egalitarianism, their collective economics, and their sense of professional identity and unique purpose in later age. However, as each inhalation is followed by an exhalation, the work practiced by the Henya is in a state of perpetual incompletion, a dual movement of possession and dispossession, of a within and a without. This is being negotiating a vacuum, being by porosity, becoming filled and becoming empty. This is what the sound of their breathing technique suggests, becoming full of oxygen and life, and letting go of life, like being pregnant and giving birth, holding the mysteries of labor and life-bearing. In my search to find the meaning of the sounds of the diving grandmothers of Jeju, I heard a rebellious sound that operates beyond the rules of language and is created outside the mainstream of modernization and economism. I heard an ancient craft and a transgenerational bond, a cultural sound object and a transmitter of memory and resistance. I heard an acoustic signature of a community and a professional identity, its fun and its purpose. The sounds of sea women gathering, showering and debating are a sonic composition of the common, a sonic composition of self-organized, transvocal, and for some ecofeminist democracy. That's what we hear before we even begin to enter the semantic level of what the vocal exchanges actually mean, or actually are, and the actual meanings of the words. This sound challenges the hegemony of speech within politics. This sound is politics. This is a little breakdown of the different ways I think about the sound they produce. And maybe I'm not going to show you documentation of, I'm not sure how we're doing in terms of time. 5 more minutes. Okay. I'm just going to go through some images. Maybe I'm not going to discuss this at the moment, which is the Sea Women. I'd like to talk to you about this new project that I've been working on for the last 9 months, and I came back from Italy last night. It's called, well, the kind of working title is Children of Unquiet. It's located in the Devil's Valley, which is in Tuscany. And this is, as you can probably guess from this image, is, which is cropped on the bottom. Anyway, it's a geothermal site, which means that there is heat, heated water underground, and which rises with very high pressure. And this pressure has been used to generate electricity or different forms of energy. In fact, this site is the first site where geothermal energy production was invented in 1904. And the first power plant of geothermal energy production was built there in Tuscany. And we got the expertise and all the know-how, all the knowledge from there. So, throughout the 20th century, a vast network of power plants in that region was built, and about 5,000 families of workers were brought to man the factories. However, since the 1980s, so this is inside one of the power plants, one of the chimneys. Since the 1980s, automation and kind of introduction of new technologies has had a kind of impact on the community and work. So people have been progressively replaced by robots and machines, and the villages have been depopulated. So when I visited this place, I was very curious. How come there are all these modernist villages and this amazing infrastructure that is depopulated? There are very few families living in some of the 5 villages, and there is something about that site and its sonorous properties that is very striking. It's like standing on a hot steam pressure cooker or something. There is so the steam coming out of the earth makes a specific sound. The factories and each pipe that connects, that takes the steam from the earth and takes it into the power plant has its own drone. In fact, let me just play something very quickly. Whoop. Where's the sound? That. Yes.
E questo dove?
So this is the sound of one of the steam, or one of the pipes with steam coming out. So the narrative goes now that the younger generation has to move out, move away for opportunities, and work elsewhere. So the intervention, or rather the project that I've been working on, is with the local school and a group of about 40, these are images of the abandoned homes, with a group of about 45 small children from the age of 5 to the age of 13. And we've been going around listening to this sonorous landscape, reproducing the sounds of the landscape. What I have filmed is a kind of occupation, an imagined occupation of the villages and the factories by the children, where they sing. So I'm just going to go through some of these images. So they occupy the 3 different kinds of landscapes or settings: industrial, natural, and residential. They sing and play, they do different things, as well as read. Actually, maybe I'm going to end with this. The dutiful worker bees, joined with their flowers in a virtual union of mutual aid, are the stuff of socialist utopia. The bees belong to the bygone era of hegemony of industrial production. Wasps love orchids. These wasps are not your dutiful worker bees. They aren't driven to produce anything. Wasps and orchids do not suggest any morality tale, but rather open love up to the encounter of singularities. Wasps who love orchids point toward the conditions of the bipolitical economy. How could these wasps be a model for economic production, you might ask, when they don't produce anything? The bees and flowers produce honey and fruit, and the wasps and orchids are not just hedonists and aesthetes. One should not discount their immaterial production. The little kid then, the smaller one, asks, "What is immaterial production?" And the other one answers, "The work my mum knows," "the work of my mum, who knows every secret of the house, even where my socks hide." Thank you. Shall I turn this off? Yeah?
To sit in the middle.
Don't wear lace with the mic.
Is it
Sorry?
cold? Is it getting cold? Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I've got my dress.
behind me too.
Is that okay? Or my jacket's maybe blocking it. Thanks, Mikhail. That was wonderful and so exciting to see the new work and see how the kind of beginning seeds of the collaboration with Sonia, and then they work with the choir and the Welsh, or the colliery workers, and then this positioning of the children echoing that kind of design, if you like. I just wanted to start with a question about this notion of peer collaboration, and you talked about collaborating with Mikhail and also David Skinner and Ian Bailey, and you've talked about collaborating with Uriel Orlov. And I'm just thinking about, at what point is there permission, in a sense, to say, okay, I'm not necessarily going to use art as service, I'm going to use art as a development of my own practice? And is it to do with being, I don't want to insult either of you, but is it about a mid-career moment? Is it, you know, some artists seem to do it very early in their career. Is it linked to marginalization, that moment coming at where it has in your production? I'm just interested how those moments happen in a way. And I know there's pressure from funding bodies to keep art as service, art in relation and response to communities, more and more pressure to do that, actually. And so I just wondered if either of you want to talk about that permission. I see it as that moment where you go, I'm going to, you know, the moment when you saw Mikhail perform and you thought, I want to work with that. You know, what was that like? What was that moment? And what do you think enabled you to do it? Or how was it structured? Because I think that would help a lot of us as artists to imagine and act that, if we haven't already. Do you want to say something about that, Sonia?
Yeah. Am I on, by the way? Can you hear me?
Yep.
I mean, I think the question about being required, particularly through funding bodies, to but also through a lot of kind of educational projects that I've worked on in the past. And I've worked with lots of different kinds of community groups, defined as community groups. There's a kind of frustration, really, that by working with a group who is deemed to be disadvantaged in some way, that there is this assumption that this, by bringing in an artist, somehow one will redeem them somehow. And so there's a lot of pressure to make sure that the work represents that community somehow. Whereas, and this may be my own invention, but I kind of assumed that if I work with another artist, they will represent themselves. And that I'm interested in trying to move away a bit from having the responsibility, or be that responsibility being projected on me, but that we might all be able to say what we think, act as we want, choose what we want to take part in or not, and not be brought into a kind of arrangement where, yeah, that where the balance of power is kind of skewed. So, you know, I'd reached that point really where, you know, the question about doing projects where I've then become some kind of vehicle for representation or for, yeah, that I just felt really constrained by. So for me, working with Mikhail, working with David Skinner, working with Ian, it's a slightly different set of negotiations at play. That is much more about they're coming with their skills of what they already know how to do. Yeah. So that's been my that was the point for me at which I wanted to work with Mikhail, even though I didn't know what we were going to do. You know, but I just kind of felt somewhere that there was, that I was, you know, Mikhail was this kind of, in terms of your performance, it was like this magnet. Like I have to kind of.
Yeah, I felt it as well.
Yeah, I have to see whether Mikhail would be interested, and he was, even though he didn't know. Neither of us knew what that was going to be, and neither did David Skinner. We just didn't know. But there was a level of we have enough skills amongst us to take that leap, and it was very similar working with Ayin. You know, that there was enough skills to just say, okay, well, let's just see. We don't know what the seeing or what the doing will bring, but we don't necessarily have a responsibility to anybody else, but to see what this thing is.
Yeah, and I think your journey and relationship to that frustration is slightly different. You know, possibly because of the way you're situated. You know, you're not a black woman. You're not being asked to negotiate or be a vehicle for this. And I wonder, you know, has peer collaboration been part of your practice for a long time, or was the work with Uriel, Sounds from Beneath, the beginning, or working with Sonia kind of initiated that idea for you a bit more?
Well, I don't know how to respond to this, because for me it was like a natural progression of my practice. That I spent quite a bit of time doing a doctorate, and I was kind of exploring the voice as a kind of sculptural material, the voice in art, and I was very much focusing theoretically on other people's voices, practically on my voice. And I was the only person at that point in an art school who was calling himself a sculptor, and my material was the voice. And my voice, my body, was my kind of material, I was experimenting, was my kind of canvas, my voice, my throat. So I spent quite a long time developing that material, both in writing and in terms of kind of artworks. And then it was just a very natural progression in my practice to then be interested in other people's voices, in other people's practices, and what they could, you know, how my work could be transformed or morphed through that. So I think the beginning of that was a collaborative album that I created called Morphica. That was the beginning, in which I think both of you are part of, as far as I remember, and that involved about 50 people. So Morphica was a limited edition box set with 3 CDs, 15 limited edition artworks, art prints, and texts, and so on and so forth. And it was a reworking of, or a kind of remixing or morphing of the first sound kind of album that I made, which was called Orphica. So Orphica is a reference to Orpheus, the archetype of a poet or a musician, and Morphica as a kind of reference to the god Morpheus, you know, the god of transformation, morphing that material and allowing it to exist in, you know, beyond itself. So working with communities or collaborating with Sonia, or later on inviting, you know, when I got commissions, inviting other people to be part of the projects is just a normal progression of my practice. And might I add, I should add one more thing, which I think is very connected to the fact that what I'm exploring in most of my practice is the voice, whether it's through video performance or photography, what have you. But it seems to be inherent in the kind of ontology of what the voice is, that it creates the common. You know, when I vocalize, even when I make a sound, you know, that somehow addresses you, and it automatically includes you. So it creates a kind of common space. So I would be going against this kind of ontology of the material that I'm working with if I were completely disconnecting it from the communal.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on this idea of the maternal authority and the paternal logos, and it's interesting that both of you have this art as social practice, art as questioning authority, as and also questioning your own authorial positions. And I'm interested in Julia Kristeva's idea about subject in process, and what seems to me, in a way, that Mikhail's intervention in For You, Only You becomes this stand-in for you, becomes this sort of, could I say, feminized, feminist disruption, rupture, outburst. And I'm just very interested in how that allowed you to make that interruption. You didn't put yourself in it, or it's linking to your relationship with women and sound and music. It's a very interesting moment, I think, what he represents in the work.
I was going to say that I've never really thought of Mikhail as standing in for me.
Really?
In that piece, no, never. For me, he stands there as himself, but also that there are many. For me, within that piece, there are many voices that pass through him, but I didn't see it as me.
Yeah.
If I was to locate me within that piece, it would be the figures that sit in the pew as witnesses.
Right.
And yeah, because I think that there is a theme that has been running through what Mikhail was saying and running through what I was saying last week, because I did a talk last week here, which is to do with the question of the law and the subject within the law or outside of the law or negotiating the law. And I think, if one thinks about the question of the witness is there to speak to the law. I saw this and I was there, and I can bring back the message to the law somehow. So I think, for me, if I was to identify where I might be within the image of that work, it would be within the pews as a witness. Yeah, I'm not sure I would say any more about that right now.
Do you want to say more about your position in terms of what you've called the maternal, the anarchic, the rebel, the dissenter, standing in as the other and the stranger? And I loved that quote where you said the stranger became the neighbour through this piece. I thought that was a really beautiful image.
The stranger became the neighbour.
Yeah.
I think there is a constant oscillation in the piece between the role of the host and the guest. When the piece For You Only You was in development, Sonia and I kept travelling between London and Oxford, talking about one of our favourite philosophers, Michel Serres, who wrote a seminal book called The Parasite, in which he develops a kind of communication theory, and he talks about about noise. In that book, he has this wonderful story in which there are 3 mice. I'm not sure if you remember this. There are 3 mice on a table, and they are in the house of a tax collector. And so the tax collector, that's quite important that he's a tax collector. So the tax collector prepares this meal for himself. And whilst he's away, the mice come, and they're having a feast, basically. They're eating all this wonderful cheese and wonderful things that he can buy, or he was given by the farmers. And as he approaches, the floor creaks. He opens the door, and the door creaks. The mice disappear. So he sees that half of his cheese is eaten. And that's the story. But what is very interesting in this is that what was, and I think at some point he probably says, I can't remember actually, he probably says, oh my God, you know, I need to fix this, I need to fix the door, I need to fix the floorboards to fix them so that they don't creak. But what is important in the story is that what is noise to him, what he's trying to fix, what is this invasion of this kind of, or the signifier of malfunction because of rust or whatever, is actually a message for the mice, which tells them to go away. So this kind of role of what is the message, what is a noise, what is wanted, what is unwanted, who is the host and who is the guest, constantly oscillates. And I think this is what happens in For You Only You. We are in a space which is very closely connected to, well, it's a religious space. Yeah, this is where the work was performed and filmed, and the choir perform a religious work, an early music religious piece. But they don't start the piece. I enter the space, I mean physically. I mean, in a way, the first part of the work introduces us to that world where you don't see any bodies. You just get the sense of this atmosphere, this history. And then, paradoxically, I appear first. So what does that mean? Am I the host? Or am I the other? Then the choir appear, and they somehow seem to be in their own familiar space. But since I've set the scene by coughing, trying to address them in some way, then they turn into the guest. So this kind of role, this kind of relationship is very interesting, I think, in the piece and what it sets up. And it's something that haunted me after For You Only You, and I explored another work called Xenon, another collaborative work. Xenon means stranger. And may I talk about my recurrent dreams, which are very connected to that piece, to Xenon. Xenon kind of explores different situations in which people feel estranged. One element of it, which is a performance and a video, kind of explores rather alienating conditions of work, of a work environment. And within that, there's a voice of wisdom that recites the Declaration of Human Rights, reminding them, reminding of the kind of office workers of their humanity in some sort of way. So whilst I was working on that piece, I had a recurrent dream that I first had when I was about 5, which is that of being in one space, and I would constantly I would be facing a door, and I would be hearing people on the other, or someone on the other side trying to come in. And that always ended up turning into some sort of nightmare, because they were trying to force the door. I would see the shadow under at the bottom of the door, and it was never resolved until I was toward the end of Xenon, when I was going through my my British citizenship sort of test and all that procedure, when the door opened I had the same dream. The door opened for the first time after like 35 years, and someone comes in, a suited man holding a briefcase, who is also coincidentally one of the characters in Xenon. So he comes in and he tells me, "What are you doing in my house?" So all along for 35 years, I thought I was being invaded. Someone was trying to come into my space, to find out that actually I was the guest. And I was the invader. I was in someone else's space. So I think these relationships are oscillating.
One of the reasons why I kind of talk about the shift from guest to neighbour is that a guest is always going to go somewhere. You know, they're going to go. They're not meant to stay. They're not meant to. You know, they can outlive the kind of hospitality, but that hospitality is fraught with power relations. Whereas if you're a neighbour, then you know you have a right to be there. There's a kind of level of entitlement as a neighbour that there isn't as a guest. And I think that for me, that's the shift that I think starts to. I mean, in some ways, it can seem quite utopian, the idea that we can live side by side. But for me, it's about a kind of power relationship between feeling that somehow you owe someone something, which is what happens when you're a guest, to this is my space, and we may have a dividing wall or not, but that's our choice, not an imposition. So for me, that's the shift that I think starts to occur. You know, the fact that the singers in Alamiri start to take on your voice. You know, if there's a shift of voice, it happens from you introduce a new voice, and they start to they become accustomed to it, and then it becomes part of their language. You know, so you in that sense you shift from being, you know, we're
talking about the women also kind of making those
who make those, you know, kind of sounds. You know, and that they start to take on your language. But and for me, it becomes a kind of equivalent for talking about migration and migratory communities that become part and parcel of the lifeblood of a place. That, you know, so if one was going to talk about, you know, popular black music, it's within the fabric of society now. Whereas it may have come in as this idea of it being a strange thing, or an estranging experience. It's now part and parcel of our everyday vocabulary. You know, it lives with us, in us. So, you know, I've thought about, since the making of the piece, because I couldn't tell you when it was first completed. Even within a year of its completion, I couldn't talk about it in the way that I might talk about it now. It really was still at the point of it making a kind of unknown to a certain extent. We were still kind of like, what is this thing? We know that there's something there, but we're not quite sure what it is. You know, I would say the same with O Adelaide. You know, we didn't go with a message that we then wanted to kind of insist on. It was what emerged through the process. You know, and so, you know, understanding the piece is, you know, what some people call kind of post-intentionally. You know, that we work out afterwards, well, what was that, and how is it doing what it's doing, and what work is it doing?
But how do you do that when you work with communities, you know, other communities, not artists? Because usually they, you know, want to work with other people who are not artists, like with the children. They want to know why we're doing, so why are we making all these sounds? How do you frame that, and how do you frame it in a way so that the work is still open rather than predetermined and overdetermined?
I mean, it's really difficult, and I don't have one formula for that. You know, I'm just thinking of, you know, I've just been filming in Gothenburg, and you know, there were moments of real tension, because the people that I was working with couldn't see, they had no access to what I was seeing. And I was there to see what they were seeing, but they couldn't see what I was seeing. And so they were like, well, we got really fraught. You know, we had an argument, in fact. And then I had to take the footage back to them a few days later and say, well, this is what I was seeing. And they could see it afterwards. But yeah, you know, that happens really often when I'm working, that people, you know, particularly people who aren't working in the way that we've worked, they do want some kind of handrail, because it's like, it just feels too amorphous. You know, and I know that can be really scary. Some people will go with that, and some people get really worried by it. And it's like, I don't know why I'm doing this, and I don't know what this means, and I can't always say at the moment what it means, or what it is, or what it's doing. And I have to rely on people, either not necessarily people trusting, because people don't always trust when working this way, but that they've made an investment in the process, whether they know what that investment is or not, And so, you know, relying on the fact that whatever it is that brought them to the project will keep them there until it becomes clearer.
But it's interesting, that question of witness, because I witnessed Mikhail performing for You Only You in Stowe College, a very public, very rich environment, and people were so alarmed. You could see their bodies and their faces twitching, which didn't happen in the film, because that was probably an invited audience of friends who, you know, were at least a little prepared, but could still see that tension in the miners, ex-miners' faces, that moment where you think, oh, they're going to lose it, they're going to giggle, they can't believe they're opening their mouths so wide, and nor can we. And that is lovely, because I think I wanted to talk a bit about congregation. Like, you're witnessing, if you see yourself in the pew, you're witnessing it, and then we're witnessing it. I'm really interested in the congregational idea, like secular spirituality, which I think comes into both of your practices in this way of, obviously, the word devotional. How do you reuse it? How do you make it an acceptable word? And I think the sacred, the sacramental, that the moment where those men are all humming at the end of that piece, you know, always makes me incredibly moved. And, you know, even just imagining that Italian 6-year-old trying to read about wasps and orchids and some Deleuzian idea, it's so exciting and unnerving. And I think that thing about being unnerved but without being dictated to, you know, I think that's what you're both really good at, creating this space where things can be unhinged and then somehow brought back together, and you think, how did that happen, you know? I'm aware that we've, you know, we could probably talk amongst ourselves, but I also want to open it up to responses, questions from you, and anything else you'd like to pick up. There's lots of things I've still got to bring up, but if you want to respond, that would be really interesting. Have we all seen the piece for You Only You downstairs? Because that really, no, some of you haven't. Okay, I think it's going to be on. Is it going to be on for a while tonight?
It's on
oh,
now.
good.
Yeah,
oh, good. Yeah.
Until 9. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to stop at 8:30, and
it's 8 o'clock.
So you will have time to go and see it. Any immediate questions or responses, or do you want me to keep going?
I was just going to say something. It's off to the side, but it was just something you said earlier.
She doesn't need her mic.
It may seem a bit off to the side because it was something was said early on, but it's just, and it's not. It's just, I just wanted to raise it, even though it's very obvious. It was about the disembodied voice, and you were saying, of course, the voice can't exist without the person. But we do live in a world increasingly where machines talk to us, kind of a lot. And so I sort of think about that for me in terms of your work, because you're standing there and I hear your voice, and I don't know what's to be said about it, but I just wanted to say it because I feel like actually we even have computer voices, but we also have it all the time on the tube, on the, you know, just literally all the time, and I feel this dislocation of the body through technology, not just with voice in other ways, but maybe the voice is sort of more profound in its disturbance, really, saying please and thank you and good evening, whatever, this machine. And it kind of marks this disjunction, this sort of this disconnection. And I think this is also what Michel said, because you happen to mention him. It's what he's kind of concerned about, this dislocation, to just put it very briefly. I
mean, in the text, so do you want me to make?
Yeah, no, that's,
in the text, I'm kind of making a distinction, saying unless we're talking about technologically mediated voices or psychoacoustic phenomena, there isn't such a thing as a disembodied voice. And there are disembodied voices. We're actually listening to one now. It's all right.
I suppose,
it's a very good example.
It wasn't really a question. It was actually also a response that I wanted to say. My response to your work is that it counters this.
Wow, that's great.
Wow, that was just You couldn't have choreographed that more.
No, it was fantastic.
I just wanted to... Just wait till this...
Don't worry.
Yeah, it wasn't I'm trying to kind of say, mark out what you said. It's more like I wanted to respond that I feel that's what's in your work, this kind of bringing it back and this thinking about it through not just this sort of haptic sense, but the fact that it's not about the symbolic of what you're saying, but actually about trying to let go of that. It's not about information, but about, as it's kind of rationally, or the logos, you know, of that, but about what we can get from it other than
Are you talking
the meaning
about
in the sense.
how the voice works on us?
Affect, yeah, that's the word.
Yeah, it's a kind of punctum, isn't it? The way it works on us when we're in the same space as it. It works on us, in us and outside of us. Is
Yeah, I
that what
suppose
you
it's
mean?
the body, the body in a general sense, because you were talking about being it is. You're saying we can't have a voice without the body, which is right. But we kind of can, we kind of do, and that's sort of the problem. But it's about bringing that, what was the word we just said? Is the body affect kind of is, the material.
Well, it makes me think actually of the abject, which is also a quality that is in Sonia and Mikhail's work, and this. I have a sensation of abjection with those voices. It makes me feel like I've got to leave my body. I'm in the wrong body, or I'm in the wrong place, or I find it very physically repellent. I find it very,
repellent?
Yeah, yeah. I really get enraged by those voices, those unreal voices.
What, downstairs?
I mean, computerized.
Oh, computerized.
You know, those self-serve things that tell you in a certain tone what you're to do, and
there is. I mean, it's very alienating because you don't. I think we have to invent another language for these disembodied voices. Somehow, what is disturbing is the fact that we are very intelligent and very able to understand that these are not human voices. They're not coming from human bodies. However, what is disturbing is the language they use, which presumes there is a kind of speaking I. So when an automated message says, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," or "I apologize," I mean, what is actually disturbing there is the use of I, you know, because you think, where is this I? What is it?
But I think there is still also something abject in the work that we've produced. You know, I think that, you know, that response, you know, if I go back to the audience for the very first performance, who were so nervous, they you know, they laughed because they didn't know what to do, you know, and it was like they were scared. They really were scared by the noise that you were making, and were looking to each other across the pews to see, is this meant to be happening? Yes. So we you know, in a way we've heard it several times now. So you can become accustomed to it. Sure. But for those people who were kind of, I suppose, uninitiated in what they were coming to, they were really very scared, and then they were hooked. But that nervousness and that what is going on and what are you doing, we can't, you know, we mustn't forget that is the reaction to the stranger. You know, I mean, it's also in O Adelaide. You know, a colleague came with her partner, and her partner said, "Well, you know, I'm really glad that I didn't see this in my own, because it feels a bit like a horror movie. You know, there's something in it that's got under my skin that makes me really scared." And so I was really glad that there are other people in the room. And so we can't I don't think we should try and shoo that away.
Yeah,
I think we really need to see what that is and not. I suppose one of the things that I am trying to grapple with at the moment is, you know, am I being good? You know, am I trying to be good in the work that I do? And okay, if I'm not trying to be good, am I trying to be bad? Well, I don't think I'm trying to be bad either, but that there is this discursive space, which is what I'm drawn to, is that discursive space where it's neither trying to remedy something or trying to hide something, to allow it to be in there, whatever. And even if it is making people's skin crawl or them feeling nervous, and then say, well, okay, what is that? And that's not that I want to punish anybody, but that it's in the work, and I don't want to censor that. I think it's really important to look at what that is. So, you know, I didn't want us to get down the road where we're thinking, okay, you've got the machine voices that do that, but we do something which is much more embracing and warm, or something like that. I'm not sure that's what we're doing, and I don't want us to think that, you know, I want us to recognise maybe that there's a whole range of things. I mean, it's very ecstatic with both pieces actually. There's a kind of ecstasy within that, but it's a scary ecstasy. You know, and so I want to embrace all of the bits that are comfortable and uncomfortable.
I just wanted to ask a slightly technical question, because I'm not classically trained in music at all, and this rescoring that you did with the Desprez score to a 13 beats per bar, so classically trained people, the minute they heard the choir, they knew it was altered, did they?
Yes, of course. Yes.
And it's altered because it's speeded up, or it's just the emphasis, or everything is... Because to me it sounds like beautiful classical, you know, I don't hear it, and I almost, you know, I'd love to have that opportunity to hear both and look at what it was doing to me, even though I wasn't aware of it, because all I heard at first was your interruptions, and then they're overlapping and taking on that wildness with that anarchy. But I didn't know there was anarchy in their bit as well.
What happens at the beginning? What happens at the beginning? I took parts of the Desprez, Josquin Desprez score, and I kind of deconstructed it and put it together again in some sort of way. But that was not really mathematically altered. What was mathematically altered was the last part that turns more into a dance. Right. When the piece introduces a kind of bass line.
Right.
Anyway, so
I was hoping you'd demonstrate.
So a beat, and that beat has 13. That bar has 13 beats. Has 13 beats.
And it should have 12.
Well, usually it should have 6 or 4 or something like that. I don't know. I can't remember actually the original. Right. It shouldn't have 13.
Okay.
It's far too many to count, and you can't divide it into equal sort of. One would have 6, the other would have 7. You know, kind of parts. So it constantly gives you this kind of sense of there's something missing, and you want to complete it. So you go to the next bar. But that's also not complete, so you go to the next one. So it's something that is very typical of Balkan music. I mean, Romanian music is fantastic at this. I'm not sure if you've ever kind of sensed it when you listen to Romanian folk music, but it really has that. And anyway, so that was particularly complex for the vocalists, because they had to reconfigure something that was very familiar to them, and see it or sing it in a very different way, and that was quite challenging for them. So it's the familiar becoming unfamiliar somehow, with just a very subtle change.
Does anyone else want to respond at this point, or other questions?
Notion of the familiar and the neighbours and the neighbour is playing around in my mind.
And something about the familiar and the neighbour, or neighbourliness. And what's the difference between being a guest and being a neighbour? Being a neighbour is someone who, there is an exchange. You build up neighbourliness through exchange, through a contract, an agreement, the common, if you like. Whereas the guest is always in a certain kind of position of stasis, a sort of always under a test of some kind, even though you can't quite work out what that test might be, or the rules. And there we're taken back to the idea of the law. And what is the law of the house, or the law of the land, or and those ideas are very rich, and they're playing. And what I'm really enjoying is the way they're playing through my mind in terms of the memory of both of your practices, and where they somehow start to come together around a notion of exchange and dialogue and conversation, which takes me back to what you were saying, Sonia, about collaboration and not feeling the one responsible all the time, but actually that you share the responsibility. So if you share the responsibility as a neighbour for your common place, there's something playing around in my head around all of these ideas. And then remembering going to Stowe and experiencing the work, and that it was absolutely taking me as a guest out of my skin. Absolutely, the sonorous, the sonority, the rhythms, the sonic experience of it. And not to mention my anxiety about being in a religious environment. It was very, very powerful. So there's a lot of ideas that are just floating through my random brain at the moment, and I just wanted to share them. So that's all to say. So I don't know.
Thank you, Anne.
That was great.
Oh, that was a good little.
Yeah, that was me coming up for breath.
Sumbasori.
She spoke.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask a question, but I didn't manage to formulate one. But perhaps it is. Maybe I need to have that later. Perhaps it is. Where do you both now? What are you both taking from what you've done together, in terms of the work that you're doing either with other people, or is there something that you carry with you from that experience? That's what I find particularly intriguing.
So who's going to answer that first, Sonia?
I'm writing down the question so I don't.
Ask me to repeat.
I mean, we talked about patience before. For me, that was very important in that collaboration. Sonia earlier framed it in terms of not quite knowing where we're going, but we are going nonetheless, and we're doing this together. And there were several parties in the project that were trying to shape, kind of give a form to this this project before the project was actually ready to have a shape. And I think what I took with me was kind of learning to be patient with the project, whatever I'm working on, with the ideas, the collaborators, until the project kind of reveals itself to me rather than the other way around. And that is, for me especially, because I usually want to complete things. But then working on a project that takes 2 years, I mean, it's really frustrating. But sometimes a project needs 2 years.
I mean, I suppose mine is similar to a certain extent in that in that space of not knowing what something's going to become and kind of holding my nerve, but also there's been a kind of shift in that not wanting to instrumentalize the work, if that makes sense, so that it reveals itself. I don't, trying not to have a message. Trying to, because what particularly in terms of practice, I'm sure that everybody in this room would recognise always wanting to make meaning, and trying to trust that, again, meaning will reveal itself, but not necessarily that one forces meaning onto. So, this question about, a year later, several years later, 6 years later, the work making sense 6 years later, rather than necessarily at that moment that it's being made. And we're kind of trained to try and make meaning all the time, immediately. And so it's quite a battle, because of not wanting to make nonsense, but being interested in nonsense.
Yes. Yes. Also being somehow accepting of the kind of feelings that emerge during the process. I think when at the beginning of my work as an artist, I was constantly going against my feelings. If I was very moved by something or drawn to something, I would always go away from it, thinking, okay, I've got to be rational about it and just follow that. But actually, in the works that I've shown, I haven't followed that rule. I set out to do something, but then there are moments that there is something else. There's something else that just touches me. Actually, the decision to work with children for this project was when we were last September, October, when I did a month-long residency in Italy. I visited one of those abandoned villages, and I didn't know anything about them. In fact, the project started in a completely different way. So I was very struck by that. And then I just saw casually a mum and a child coming, kind of passing. And I just said, ciao, as one does in Italy. And the mother didn't speak to me. But the child turned and said, ciao. And I don't know, I was so moved. I mean, I almost cried for some reason. I don't know. There was something about that moment. Seeing this child in that context and really kind of making contact with me, whereas the adult wouldn't. I don't know, and I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to do something, I became curious. What is it, what does he think about this place? Everyone else around him, feeds him this idea that he has to leave, that he has no future here. And in fact, where we shot it, it has only one woman who's 90 years old who lives there, and one man who's in his 60s. And then I thought, I want to know what it is that they might imagine about this place, what they might want to do. So just giving them a ball and letting them do whatever they want in that space was just incredible. To watch them just inhabit that space and fill that space with just, their noise and laughter and playing and arguments and, all these different things. I thought it was just incredible, somehow.
I just want to draw it to a close, and I want to end with a quote from John Cage, who sort of seems to have ghosted bits of this evening. And as you know, he did lifelong collaborations with artists, and particularly Merce Cunningham. He once said, "When I hear what we call music, it seems to me that someone is talking, and talking about his feelings or his ideas of relationships. But when I hear the sound of traffic, I don't have the feeling that anyone is talking. I have the feeling that sound is acting. And I love the activity of sound. I don't need sound to talk to me. So sound is acting. I love that idea. The acting, what have both of these artists made to act in the collaboration, in each other, in us. And I think those are, you know, there's just been so many ideas that we could build on and talk about more, and it's been really exciting, and it's always great to find new things in people's work that you have known very, very well and closely. So I feel it's been really rewarding, and thank you to both of you, and thank you all for coming and your contributions. And the piece is still showing, the pieces are still showing downstairs, so thank you. And do you want to say anything?
I was going to say, and you're probably going to show Adelaide so that we can kind of complete the...
Great. We're going to show it now?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Before we thank them audibly, as it were, with our hands, just thank you very much.